As our climate shifts, so do the fates of the most vulnerable communities. Droughts, floods, rising sea levels threaten lives, livelihoods, and cultural heritage. In over half of the world's 25 most climate-vulnerable nations, conflict and fragility amplify the climate crisis. These countries are also the least equipped to cope with these climate shocks. The more vulnerable and fragile a nation, the less likely it is to receive climate finance and resources. We are caught in a destructive cycle where climate impacts, vulnerability, and fragility reinforce each other. And adaptation and resilience cannot take hold. The time to break this cycle is now. Climate action isn't just possible, it is proven, even amid crises and remote areas. Early warnings, climate-resilient food, water and energy systems, community-based approaches, and climate risk insurance. These aren't just solutions, they're lifelines with a track record of impact. These actions do more than mitigate climate risks. They foster gender equality, prevent humanitarian needs, and bolster peace. We need a paradigm shift to accelerate innovative, risk-tolerant, conflict-sensitive strategies. The Cop28 Declaration on Climate, Relief, Recovery and Peace, and an initial package of finance, programming, and partnership solutions lay the groundwork for climate action that invests in all communities. Now is the time for bold, united action. Together, let's turn the tide and leave no one behind.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, frontline community representatives amongst us, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. My name is Itonde Kakoma. I serve as the president of Interpeace, an international organization for peace building, and it is my great distinct privilege to serve as moderator for today's event. Further to this, it's my privilege and honor to welcome you to this signature Cop28 presidency event of Relief, Recovery and Peace Day and the launch of the Cop28 UAE Declaration on Climate, Relief, Recovery and Peace and accompanying package of solutions designed by a wide spectrum of climate, development, humanitarian and peace-building actors to accelerate climate actions and resourcing for people in areas threatened or affected by conflict, fragility, or facing severe humanitarian needs. Now, at this moment, let me welcome with distinct honor our official hosts at Cop28, the government of the United Arab Emirates, represented by Her Excellency Reem Al Hashimi, the Minister of State for International Cooperation, for opening remarks. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Kakoma, for that kind introduction. Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, it's incredible to see so many familiar faces, and it is my distinct pleasure to be able to welcome you to COP28 and to the United Arab Emirates, as well as this flagship event of Relief, Recovery and Peace Day, the first in the COP process. It is moreover an honor to join such a remarkable constellation of governments, international and regional organizations, and development, humanitarian, peace-building and climate actors. Our presence here today sends a clear message that the nexus of climate, humanitarian, and peace and security issues must be on the political agenda at every COP. It is also a message crystallized in the Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration, our anchor for this afternoon. This is a joint product representing inputs from hundreds of stakeholders who live and work in vulnerable settings facing fragility, conflict, or severe humanitarian needs. I'm pleased to announce that over 70 countries and 40 organizations have already endorsed this. And I'm also pleased that, as we will hear shortly, this is accompanied by an initial set of actions from signatories, what we are calling a package of solutions to immediately operationalize the objective. It is also no coincidence that this first Relief, Recovery and Peace Day coincides with the COP process's first Health Day, or that these days open Cop28's two-week program. We need a human face on climate change. We, as decision makers, practitioners, and UNFCCC negotiators, must always have at the front of our minds whom we are here for and why we must raise ambition every year on adaptation, loss and damage, 1.5 degrees, and finance. When we commenced preparations for our presidency, we took the global stocktake as our guiding star. What are the gaps in implementation of the Paris Agreement? And what are the solutions we must invest in to fill them? What we heard was unequivocal. Our current system is leaving people behind, especially women, people of determination, children, and youth in LDCs and in SIDS. These people are notably located in the areas that are also most vulnerable to climate change and the least able to cope with its impacts. The long-term humanitarian emergencies, the security crises, the disappearing islands, the places where climate finance fears to tread. In these settings, per capita climate finance is typically 5 and sometimes 80 times less than non-fragile settings. In many cases, humanitarian actors who are meant to be the last resort become the only resort. Over the last year, stakeholders, especially those in this room, have repeatedly flagged this gap as the blind spot of the climate sphere. We cannot have a meaningful response to the global stocktake without acknowledging it. At the same time, we know we cannot treat climate in isolation from man-made choices around policy or conflict and then consider that our work is done. And we also know the broader scientific context. Climate-related displacement and tension are accelerating because we are failing on greenhouse gas emissions. A just and accelerated energy transition is therefore one of the greatest contributions we can make to highly vulnerable communities. But in these consultations on fragile and vulnerable settings, we also heard a resounding message of optimism. Climate action in the most challenging operational circumstances actually works. We've delivered, and we can deliver programs in the midst of drought, instability, conflict, and sea level rise. There is a growing track record of implementing resilient food and water systems, renewable energy, enhanced social protection mechanisms, and early warnings with anticipatory action. The returns on these actions are second to none. The declaration and package of solutions we are collectively launching today is one step toward realizing this potential. It unites all of us from the peace, development, climate and humanitarian sectors around a shared set of objectives focused on increased resourcing, access to finance, conflict sensitivity, enhanced risk appetite, and governments and local actors' capacity to effectively absorb finance. We will hear today from diverse speakers about how the Declaration's objectives can be achieved and what the next level of ambition can and must look like. The UAE and the COP presidency are committed to this work stream and are confident that with even more partners and resources on board in COPs to come, a climate-resilient, more peaceful future is possible. While this is the first Relief, Recovery and Peace Day, let it also be the inaugural one. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Let us once again express appreciation to our host for these opening remarks thank you for that, and for providing the leadership to put on the agenda the inextricable relationship between climate change, peace and security. Now, allow me to welcome to the stage our distinguished panel of speakers to join me here for a dialogue on solutions to increase finance and policy for climate action in areas threatened or affected by fragility, conflict, or facing severe humanitarian needs. I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage His Excellency Salah Ahmed Jama, the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia. Sir, you're most welcome. His Excellency Benedito Freitas, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste, you are most welcome. Ms. Rukia Abdullah, a passionate youth advocate from Yemen, you are most welcome to the stage. His Excellency Alvaro Leyva, the Foreign Minister of Colombia. Bienvenido. Ms. Mafalda Duarte, Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, most welcome. And Ms. Ana Bierde, Managing Director of Operations of the World Bank, you are most welcome to the stage. So, dear colleagues, we've gathered for a solution-oriented declaration event. Your Excellency, Salah Ahmed Jama, the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, allow me to start with you, if I may. It would not be an overstatement to say that climate change is wreaking havoc on people's livelihoods and security, and this intersection is a harsh reality, sir, in countries and communities particularly affected by fragility and conflict. Now, the cost of inaction is high. Sir, what, from your perspective, are the top two things you believe need to be addressed to make climate action and specifically finance more relevant in the most challenging of settings? And how can the Conference of Parties process contribute to this? The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, allow me to thank the organizers of this event in identifying a very important, what has been classified as the blind spot of planning for climate financing and global stocktake in terms of fragile-prone, conflict, and climate change-impacted countries like that of Somalia. Let me give you a prelude. As we sit here today, almost one-third of the Somali landscape is flooded, which means people's life and livelihoods have been highly disrupted. This might be the current phase of Somalia, but on the other hand, we are doing a whole host of other things to revive the Somali state and improve the livelihoods of our citizens. By the end of this month, Somalia is supposed to complete its HIPC initiative, a process that took us over 10 years of very prudent and constraining fiscal disciplinary measures. We are on the edge of defeating Al-Shabaab for good, and we are trying to develop national development plans that are anchored on the strategy of poverty reduction strategy. As we try to do all those things to improve the livelihoods of our citizens, who are by nature very resilient and very capable people, blessed with livestock, the longest coast in continental Africa, and entrepreneurial people, climate shocks have the capacity to hinder any possible progress we can make in the security front, in the state building front, and in economic growth. So to come to your question, Somalia is part of a series of countries that are highly vulnerable to climatic shocks, but are the least beneficiaries of global climate finances. Our National Determined Contribution Plan, currently in its revised form, estimates that Somalia would need $16 billion till 2030 to combat climate change. But we only get about $300 million a year, mostly in programs that are more responsive rather than preventive. So my conclusion is the global financial instruments put in place after the Paris Agreement must account for situations like Somalia, and the focus should be on structural transformational interventions rather than responses, early warning system, and scaling up climate finance to address the fundamental structural issues so that people can cope and live with climate change. Climate change shocks are not surprises or unanticipated incidents anymore. They're becoming a norm and a way of life. That would be my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And we hear very clearly the structural transformations and interventions that need to take place. And with that, we turn to Your Excellency Bendito Freitas, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste. The question here is, why is the intersection of climate change, peace and security important in today's world? And why must the world rally support to increase climate action and financing, specifically for countries and communities affected or threatened by fragility or conflict? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Timor-Leste is a small island state. We just have our freedom. It's a nation state more than only 2 decades. And we have faced the situation in the long journey of our struggle for freedom. And we also have experienced the difficulties of peace, recovery, and reconciliation. And we had in the whole process, as a new country, we just revealed it from the difficulties that we faced after our referendum. And we work hard with our leaders and support from the international community. We have developed a strategic plan for coping with the development of the country, as well as to respond to the challenges of climatic and other threats. It is also to inform that last night we just had an experience, not Timor-Leste, but there was an earthquake, which is also in the part of Mindanao in the southern Philippines, also affected Timor-Leste. It's really one of the challenges we face. In terms of challenge to the climate, peace and recovery, it's really very much interrelated, because as politicians in the country, we have to formulate our policies in order to cope with the situation regarding policy development, as well as to the welfare of the people. So for the country's policy, we have also a department that really established to respond to these challenges of the nature and other calamities that may cause. For us, it's really very important in terms of peace, recovery, and development. Timor-Leste our fragile state, but our leaders in 2010, we have established this intergovernmental organization called G7+, which is constituted of 20 countries, mostly friends, sisters and brothers from Africa. We have here present our Secretary General of the G7+. We are cooperating, uniting together the voices to bring out what are the challenges we face in the reconciliation process, in the state building, and also peace building process in the country. And we particularly experience this difficult time ourselves. And that I think it's good to cooperate with other countries in the region, particularly in Asia and also Pacific, to address the issues that we are facing. It's also important to note here that we have very important lessons that we acquired or learned during our hard times in experience. So we are a small country. We do not have much resources, but we have our natural resources, oil and gas. With the little thing that we have, we are supporting our brothers, those who are probably affected by the situation. Let's say, for instance, a few months ago in Morocco, Timor-Leste provided support of 1.5 billion to support Morocco in that situation. Difficult. Does not mean that we have everything, but we have little that we have. We have our fraternity for our fellow human beings. So this is really important. And the importance for the communication with our leader, with the global coordination policies. And so far, it's also to inform here that we are moving towards our preparation for the full membership to ASEAN. This is also a link that in terms of regional access, very important for us to coordinate on this matter, on the climate mitigation process, everything we are coordinating with our neighbors in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And with that spirit of solidarity you described, we turn to Ms. Rukia Abdallah, a young climate leader, an advocate from Yemen. Ms. Abdallah, climate change has already impacted lives and livelihoods, we know, in Yemen, and further compounding existing crises, humanitarian, resulting from conflict. How do you see your role in contributing to solutions for climate action in places such as Yemen, as I know you are an advocate elsewhere as well? And what are the top 2 things to achieve at this COP to ensure your generation does not inherit further risk and vulnerability?
First of all, let me thank you for having me today in this session. And I would love to thank the initiative of having this declaration on peace, recovery, and relief, especially for us coming from most conflicted countries in the world. I would like to just highlight that countless numbers of people and lives in Yemen, Syria, Palestine, Somalia, and Sudan are being affected by climate crisis. And having me today among this panelists just remind me of these people and their stories with the floods, droughts, and displacement. And that was basically the reason that urged me to act, and not only to amplify their voices, but only to turn their stories and their suffering into solutions. Living in one of the conflicted areas doesn't give us that space to have climate change solutions, and doesn't give us even the opportunities to work against climate change. And me coming from Yemen, which is a country that 70% of people are food insecure, having climate change issue is not like something that we do care. They consider it as a secondary issue, so they're not even giving us the space. However, with the unstoppable power that we do have within the young people in our country, we managed to conduct the first local conference of youth on climate change and environmental issues, and we targeted 400 young people with the resources and knowledge that they need to face the climate change and to represent their voices. And happily, proudly, I would say that we do have 3 of our Yemeni colleagues from Yemen, Ghadir, Amir, Mustafa, Muhammad, they're participating in the regional COIs and the global COI, and they are participating today with us in the Conference of Party, which is considered one thing that I would be so proud. And one other thing we managed, after being stopped several times, taking into consideration the political concerns that we're facing in our country, we managed to bring all stakeholders in the same table Yes, we managed to just bring all our stakeholders among one table, and we produce one comprehensive report within our demands on climate change and environmental issues. Regarding my hopes for COP28, I would just remind all of us here that our generation is the most impacted generation. If we're not getting this seriously now, and if we're not addressing the climate issues that we're facing, and having the loss and damage fund established like 2 days ago, it is an incredible start, but I would encourage the developed countries to have like more contribution to this fund, as personally I believe that the amounts that were mentioned will not be sufficient to cover all the needs compared to the needs that we're facing. One other thing I would hope that we achieve during COP28 is climate justice when distributing these funds, considering the conflicted areas, especially in the MENA region, as we're not getting that much fund for development. We're only getting the fund for the humanitarian aid only. And today I'm here not to present only my voice, but I'm representing and carrying hopes and fears of my generation, which were afraid of our future, that maybe climate would steal our peace. Thank you.
Thank you for this. And you hear the round of applause. Thank you. We now turn to His Excellency Alvaro Leiva, Foreign Minister of Colombia. Yo pienso que se posiblemente en español también. I think, but I have to check. Is that correct, colleagues?
No, it's
it
not
is
correct.
Not. So in English.
I'm fluent in English, but I would prefer to speak Spanish, but it seems that it's impossible. So I'll try to do it in English, okay?
We will try together.
Okay, I'll try to do my best.
Thank you.
Colombia is only 1% of the solid Earth. 1%. Even though it's only 1% of the solid Earth, it produces almost one-sixth of the biota, flora and fauna, okay? So it is incredible. We have all sorts of resources. First of all, the humid tropical forest, flowers, fauna. We're supposed to be, with Costa Rica, our Pacific coast, up to the middle of Ecuador, the richest country in rainfall. There's a town in Colombia, in the Pacific, that it rains 360 days a year. I was Minister of Mining and Energy many years ago, and the Germans gave me the inventory, the water inventory. And by those days, many years ago, we were the third country in water supply, rivers, oceans, because the Andes, it's a huge, high, beautiful mountains, straight from the south of the continent up to Colombia, and when it gets to Colombia, it opens in three. So you have different climates, different balancing between the three main chain mountains that are found right when the country begins in the southern part. You have all possibilities. At the same time, I'm talking about the light, the sunlight. It's one of the places where it's the brightest during a very long period of time daily. So instead of having only one possibility of having one, how would you call it? I'm talking about from the point of view of agriculture. We can have up to two phenomena, cosechas. It's I don't know the wording. I forgot the word.
We understand.
Okay, so it's very, very unique. We have problems. It's difficult. We're talking about the peace process. We're known for our peace processes, and I mentioned it because I was told before that you were going to make a reference to the peace
final
process.
agreement and the chapter
That is
on
correct.
biodiversity.
That is correct. But we have learned quite a lot, quite a lot. When you talk about peace, you are not talking about peace which is necessary in between Russia and Ukraine, or now in between Israel and Palestine. The first peace you have to really think about is peace with history. With peace with history. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about Israel and the Palestinians. They were Semites, and they appear in between the Tigris and the Euphrates 2,000 years ago. They haven't been able to make peace. So this is something that is called peace with history. Then you have Mr. Churchill, who even before ending the war, at the end of the Ottoman Empire, he decided to take a napkin and put the borders on. So it's very complicated. We're suffering that initiative, which was done in a very correct way, very imaginative, but look what is happening. The other peace, peace with nature. Peace with nature. Because we have a problem. Our countries have a problem. We are in hands of those who produce the gases of, how do you call it, the efecto invernadero, okay? I don't know if you are following me.
Yes.
I'm trying to be as clear as I. And we're in hands of China on one side, and the other side, United States, and some other countries. But actually, we're victims. We're victims. So when I come to places like this, experiences like this, I've been in many of them. I have talked to a lot of countries, and they're always making the same questions, talking about how to do things we haven't done much since the Paris Agreement. We are not even in the middle of the road because the clock is turning back instead of going further. So this is something, let me talk, I know time runs a lot, but let me complete the idea. So we have to commit ourselves to go from just putting the things on the table to solve the problems. And it's necessary to talk about global peace, because otherwise we're wasting our time. And we're destroying not only our planet, but we're destroying life, and of course we are going to be the worst in history because we have to talk about our future generation. We are in a very complicated moment, and we must be conscious that we have to do something practical about what is happening right now.
Muchas gracias, Excelencia. And con permiso, because we had promised Spanish and it's not here, but you communicated very clearly in terms of the global peace agenda linked to peace with history, peace with nature. So thank you for this, sir. And with that, the commitments as you described, where we're not even halfway down the road, we now turn to financial institutions. And in that respect, Ms. Duarte, Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, it's no secret that current institutional frameworks and financial mechanisms are not adequately reaching populations to the extent envisioned in fragile and conflict-affected settings. From your perspective, how can this be improved in order to better reach these populations as described? And as the newly inaugurated, if I understand correctly, Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund, what is your vision and action plan to achieve this?
Thank you very much. And I know that I see the clock here in front of me, so
No problem.
I know we are running out of behind the schedule probably. I'll try to be very brief. Let me, first of all, congratulate everybody involved with the declaration that was just announced, and everybody that has already joined. GCF fully supports the declaration and the objectives of the declaration. Let me also say that the Green Climate Fund is embarking on a new phase of its programming, a new strategy, 2024-2027. It's a new phase, and let me take this opportunity as well to thank officially the United States, who indicated their pledge to the Green Climate Fund yesterday, in addition to countries like Portugal and Switzerland, Italy, and Estonia. So right now we are at $12.5 billion, and this is what we will plan to commit in the next 4 years. The strategy is very much anchored already in tackling and prioritizing vulnerable countries. And as a mandate from the COP, it's already very clear that we are expected to focus very much on LDCs, SIDS, and Africa. But my commitment and my vision, as I laid it out recently in the UN Climate Ambition Summit, is to go beyond that, is really to think in a very targeted and focused way, how do we reach really the most vulnerable? And we know very clearly that in fragile and conflict-affected states, this is where the most vulnerable people live. So it is, in terms of vision and commitment. Now, how to get there? I'll just say a few things. We are also committed to understand more and better how we more effectively reach these communities, and I hope that we can also forge and establish strong partnerships with the humanitarian community, who has a lot of experience on how to actually deliver support to these. In addition to this, we are well placed, and we take that responsibility seriously, because of course these are situations and circumstances that call for not the standard approach of the way we deploy support. So we have the possibility of taking more risks than most of the financial institutions, and therefore we want to really look at critically how we take advantage of that flexibility and possibility that we have at our hands, and how do we take more calculated risks. But it's also important to have robust safeguards and make sure that the voices of these communities are heard. Luckily, we have a policy, a gender policy, indigenous policy, indigenous people policy that actually call very deliberately for that. But we also have an intent to look at what should a policy look like for fragile and conflicted, affected countries. So I know you are looking at me. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Looking at you with great fondness and appreciation, because, and I'm sure colleagues in the room, not least of which being principal leadership from UNHCR, from IFRC, from OCHA, from WFP, from ICRC, and many other humanitarian agencies, heard that reference to ensuring connectivity also in the humanitarian space. So thank you for this, and to assure you we are spot on time. So thank you. We now turn to furthering the question of solutions vis-à-vis finance. We heard it from the opening remarks, and it's continued since then. Ms. Ana Bierde, Managing Director of Operations of the World Bank. As a key international climate finance provider to fragile and conflict-affected countries, what do you see, further to the remarks we've just heard, as the main challenges and priorities for scaling climate action and finance in these settings? And what innovative approaches is the bank deploying to bring effective adaptation and resilience support for communities affected by multiple, compounding, overlapping threats? if you would.
Thank you so much, and great to be here with you. And let me also start by really acknowledging the importance of this declaration, the first of its kind, and really applaud the presidency of the UAE for the leadership in coming to this stage. It's very important. I also want to just emphasize, as we've heard others say, how much the countries that are fragile and in conflict are also the countries that are the most on the front line of the climate crisis. Just from the analysis that we do on a continuous basis, we see that FCV countries, as we refer to them, are face 3 times more extreme weather events than any other countries in comparison. So I think when you ask what are some of the challenges, I think we have to really keep an eye on some of the numbers. I'll continue with some of these numbers because it's what keeps us very focused on why we need to double down on this. 25 of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, 15 of those are also on our list of fragile and conflict affected countries. So there's a huge overlap between climate vulnerability, climate crisis, as well as fragility and conflict. And if unaddressed, climate change can push an additional 132 million people into extreme poverty, which of course already is a worry of us because we've seen, unfortunately, the digression on poverty reduction. And they also worsen the drivers of fragility. Just as an example, we see it every day. We talked about it in a panel earlier today, how droughts fuel poverty and conflicts among pastoralists around the world. So what are we doing? What are some of the opportunities? At the World Bank, we're really focusing on 3 things. Of course, one of it is finance. You mentioned it. We're a large provider of finance, both on climate as well as to countries in fragility and conflict. Again, we have a concessional arm, our IDA arm, which is our fund for the poorest, and we have increased this 300 times, the financing to countries that are in fragility and conflict. So we provided about 10 million in 2016. Now we're at about just over 3 billion, and we're continuing to increase and lobby for more funds for the countries. Second, analysis is very important. The data is very important. And here we've introduced something called the Country Climate and Development Report. One of the first we did was actually for the countries in the Sahel. And what it showed that by 2050, the countries of the Sahel could be losing up to 12% of their GDP because of climate change. So we really need to really focus on this as well. And then finally, partnerships. We heard, of course, from the Green Climate Fund, the wish to partner much more with humanitarian agencies. I have to say, the World Bank really does. We also partner with CSOs. We find this incredibly important in our delivery of support to countries. We see a huge interplay between humanitarian and development. We also see a huge interplay between climate and development. And I think what we've heard on this COP is the very important link between humanitarian and climate because of the exacerbation that climate brings on poor communities and communities that are the most vulnerable. So again, really welcome this declaration. It raises the profile of this very important issue. But now we need to make sure we go from declaration to action. So we'll be watching that space. Thank you, Ms. Ana Bierde. And join me in thanking our distinguished panel, His Excellency Salah Ahmed Jama, His Excellency Benedito Freitas, Ms. Rukia Abdallah of Yemen, His Excellency Alvaro Leba, Ms. Mafalda Duarte, and Ms. Ana Bierde. Thank you so much. Please join me. Señor, Excelencia, buen servicio. Thank you again to the distinguished panel for shedding light on these intersections. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, the launch of the Declaration on Relief, Recovery and Peace today is supported by a set of commitments to taking, as we heard the last speakers refer to,
these words into action through a package of solutions. Allow me now to welcome member states and partners to convey their commitments in advancement of the package of solutions from the stage. We welcome His Excellency Andrew Mitchell, Minister of State for Development in Africa, United Kingdom. Sir, you're most welcome. His Excellency John Silk, Minister of Natural Resources and Commerce, Marshall Islands. You're most welcome. Her Excellency Anabete Tvivenarim, Minister of International Development of Norway, you're most welcome. His Excellency Mohammed Al Yasser, President of the Islamic Development Bank, you are most welcome. His Excellency Warkana, Executive Secretary, IGAD, you're most welcome, sir. His Excellency Mr. Janez Lenarčič, Commissioner for the Crisis Management, European Union. Madam Cindy McCain, Executive Director of the World Food Programme, you are most welcome. Mr. Robert Mardini, Director General of the International Committee of the Red Cross, you are most welcome for the first set of commitments towards the package of solutions. I think we can welcome them properly. And in that order, we proceed with these announcements. Mr. Mitchell, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much to His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber for inviting me to champion the Relief, Recovery and Peace Day. And I welcome the focus the COP28 presidency has placed on bringing our humanitarian development and climate efforts together. Today's declaration makes clear the pressing challenges the world faces and the need for bolder collective action to support vulnerable countries. We must ensure that their voices are heard, and we must together work to deliver the far-reaching changes necessary to build a more secure and resilient future. So I am therefore pleased to announce that the UK endorses the declaration, and we are committed to turning its commitments into action. It is vital that in responding to crises, we also set out a pathway to long-term sustainable development. And that is why Britain will develop a new and separate fund of up to 15% of our humanitarian aid to build resilience and adaptation. This will reduce the impact of future disasters, helping those directly affected to prepare better and to adapt. So next year, Britain will provide £1,000 million, £1 billion of humanitarian aid, and set up a separate fund, the RAF, at 15% of that value, to ensure that we build in, following these awful disasters, resilience and adaptation, so that the next time these disasters strike, they have much less impact. And this reflects the urgent need to increase the flow of public and private climate finance into the region and to build resilience and support the emerging green economy. There is no doubt that it will take bold, swift and wide-ranging action to build the more secure, peaceful and sustainable world we want to see. So it's heartening to witness the level of collective ambition here in the room and at this conference overall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please. His Excellency Minister Silk of the Marshall Islands. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I bring you warm greetings from the Marshall Islands. In our language, we say yape. We welcome the declaration on climate, relief, recovery and peace, and are glad to support it. We know that this historic transition we must deliver in order to live up to the promises of the Paris Agreement and must leave no one behind. As a highly vulnerable country and a fragile state, the Republic of the Marshall Islands faces extreme impacts from the climate crisis. Our fragility has not held us back from ambition.
We were the first to submit an enhanced MDC, one of the first of the shifts to submit an adaptation communication. And this week, we will launch our National Adaptation Plan. We call this our National Survival Plan. Since our extreme vulnerability means that adapting is necessary to save the atolls that we call home. We are making difficult decisions in my country. In our NAP, due to be published this week, we set out the pathways to a safe and secure future. One issue of critical importance is the social impacts of climate change. In our NAP, consultations and communities reported that increased heat is leading to greater isolation, and communities have reported that tensions are rising as resources become more scarce. Our NAP is a plan to adapt that, to address that. Of course, it means putting in place solutions to protect our territory, both nature-based solutions and more hard solutions. But it also means making effort to invest in our healthcare systems and education so that we are building a society that is healthy, educated, and safe, and will be more resilient as a result. We know that our greatest strength lies in our communities. We know that we cannot do this without support. In my country alone, the cost of adaptation will be in tens of billions. We are forced to make difficult decisions, even if we can get the finance and access to it. Fellow ministers, colleagues, we know that brutality makes it hard to take climate action. Conflict makes it harder still. This is why we are building peace. Is a vital aspect of this. And I hope to see an increased investment in peace building in countries and regions affected by climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We now turn to Her Excellency Anne-Bette Tvinnerim, Minister of International Development of Norway. Velkommen.
Tusen takk, Tande. Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to be on stage to address this topic. And thank you, a true, huge thank you to the UAE for giving us the first day of the very first COP day for relief, recovery and peace. Let's hope it's not the last. It's truly appreciated. Norway fully supports the declaration on climate relief, recovery and peace. And we know that roughly 1 out of every 5 countries throughout the world is affected by conflict and fragility. We're talking about nearly 1 billion people affected. And we all know that climate vulnerability exacerbates the underlying fragility, being it conflict, heavy dependencies on rain-fed agriculture, weak capacity, policy buffers, and vice versa. I'd like to highlight very briefly 3 issues. First, that climate shocks compound conflicts. Climate shocks may not trigger new conflicts, but we know that they heighten conflicts. Second, agriculture is vital to the economies of most of these countries, and heavy dependence on rain-fed agriculture increases the vulnerability to climate change. So we need to increase our support to ensure food security and food sovereignty. And third, in keeping with the declaration, we need to increase the climate finance to the very most vulnerable groups. And that is what Norway is intending to do and what we are doing. We are doubling our climate finance from 21 to 26. We actually already achieved this target last year, very much due to increased mobilization of private capital. And we are now tripling our support for adaptation efforts. I'd just like to highlight the name of a few of our partnerships and organizations because they deserve to have their mechanisms mentioned. We are continuing to provide support for SOF, the Systematic Observations Financing Facility, and Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems, the CRUISE initiative, all these acronyms. And we'll continue to support the Climate Security Mechanism, also the CERF, the United Nations Central Emergency Response, and the African Development Bank's Africa Disaster Risk Financing Program, a few of our main partners. And let me also mention the World Food Programme. We're continuing to support your excellent work on scaling up anticipatory action for food security. And actually, just today, we are announcing another $35 million to scale up your flagship program on anticipatory action in sub-Saharan Africa. And I wanted to mention that the title of the press release for that money is Invisible Results, and that's really what we are talking about, because we need to get there before the disaster strikes, and that means we're not going to see the results. So we need a mind shift among us donors to keep, to finance and anticipatory action instead of after that disasters strike. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Continuing the commitments and actions through a package of solutions, we welcome His Excellency Dr. Zamir Iqbal, the Mohammed Al Yasser, President of the Islamic Development Bank. You are most welcome, sir. I had received a notification, and it's better in person. So you are most welcome.
Thank you very much. Running around between sessions and between meetings makes it sometimes difficult. So we have standby deputization just in case. But I am very honored to be here with this group and at this session. Ladies and gentlemen, fragile and conflict-affected countries are disproportionately experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change, amplifying resource scarcity in these countries and disrupting livelihoods and further challenging their economies. The Islamic Development Bank recognizes the urgency of creating genuine momentum in addressing these challenges. 31 of our 57 member countries are classified as fragile. We consider it crucial to identify high-impact programs, establish effective policies, and secure significant concessional financing. Taking transformative climate action is essential for promoting inclusive development, especially among the vulnerable populations of least developed countries. To address these challenges, the Islamic Development Bank intends to provide over $1 billion in climate finance for member countries affected by fragility and conflict during the next 3 years. This financing will prioritize high-impact actions, mainly adaptation finance, aligning them with broader development objectives of addressing fragility. In this endeavor, we will try to deploy as much concessional finance as possible, including through our Lives and Livelihoods Fund. Investments in climate change, resilience, and adaptation have demonstrated their cost-effectiveness in reducing vulnerability to climate risks. The Islamic Development Bank is committed to promoting an integrated approach that simultaneously addresses sustainable development, climate change, and the deterioration of biodiversity. We also place a special emphasis on supporting women and children who often bear the brunt of climate change, conflicts, and economic hardships. The bank is committed to developing interventions that foster resilience and sustainable development in these key demographics. Finally, the Islamic Development Bank is committed to enhancing climate resilience, promoting sustainable development, and protecting women and children in its member countries facing fragility and conflict. We would like to thank the United Arab Emirates Presidency for raising this issue to the highest levels. Thank you very much.
Thanks are to you, Your Excellency, President Al-Yasser, for these very clear, bold commitments in advancement of the package of solutions. We now turn to His Excellency Warkana Gabaye, Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, my brother. Greeting from the Horn of Africa, the most affected but the most resilient region. Excellencies, as we gather for 28th Annual Climate Conference and this historic inaugural global stocktake, our region in the Greater Horn of Africa is among those on the front line of climate crisis. After weathering 6 consecutive failed rain seasons from 2020 to 2023 and the worst drought in 40 years, we are now forced to face the flooding from the relentless force of torrential rains of Illinois, leaving devastation in its wake. Within 6 months, we moved from too little water to too much. Both of these conditions create famine for our people. While our region contributes less than 1% of the global greenhouse gas emission, we bear an outsized burden of climate-related disaster. Today, I carry the voice of 300 million citizens of the IGAD region, calling for a resolute effort to forge consensus on concrete action on the Paris Agreement global goals on adaptation. Loss and damage are not abstract concepts, but a day-to-day reality for us all in the IGAD region. We congratulate the Cop28 presidency for pushing this agenda and adopting the fund. The urgency of operationalizing the fund to support vulnerable nations cannot be overstated. The recent 6th assessment report of IPCC, AR6, serves as a stark warning that we are not meeting our target of limiting global emission to 1.5 degrees. We must renew our commitment to ambitious climate action, grounded in the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. In the IGAD region, we are responsible global citizens actively contributing to combating greenhouse gas emission, as evidenced in our submission of national determined contribution, that is NDCs, to the COP process. Yet, climate adoption remains our paramount concern. Despite concerned efforts at the national and sub-national level, transboundary risks threaten peace and security in the IGAD region, that is the Horn of Africa, compelling us to establish regional framework to guide our unified response to the climate threat. As part of our common commitment to accelerate climate action, Your Excellencies, aligned with the Declaration of Climate, Relief, Recovery and Peace, I'm delighted here to unveil the IGAD Regional Climate Adoption Strategy of 2023 to 2030, the first of its kind of the African continent. The regional framework launched during this meeting embodies the aspiration of the IGAD region and serves as our collective commitment to implement adoption solutions that put people first. The climate adoption strategy has been embraced and adopted by all member states within our esteemed IGAD community, a testament of our unity, solidarity, and in our region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for this. We now turn to Mr. Lanacek, the Commissioner for Crisis Management of the European Union. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to announce today that the European Union, all of its 27 member states, endorse this declaration. And I'm very happy for that. Thank you. For us, this declaration is especially important. Also for me personally, as a commissioner responsible for humanitarian aid. Why? If you go to any of the most fragile, conflict-affected places on this planet, The people that you will surely meet are humanitarian workers. And they will tell you that they cannot do it alone, on their own. Yes, they can help save lives, they can alleviate suffering, but they cannot address the root causes of a humanitarian crisis on their own, and they cannot provide a mid-term and long-term solutions. For that, they need partners. They need partners that deal with recovery, development actors. They need partners who will bring peace. And they also need partners who will increase their resilience to increasing impact, humanitarian impact of climate crisis. That's why this declaration is so important for us as the European Union and for me personally. But what is even more important, has already been mentioned today, is that we start acting on it. And here the EU has already started to implement. Let me share some examples with you. Only a few months ago, the European Union adopted a comprehensive action package focusing on the climate and security nexus. Second, in our EU development policy, we foresee a 30% spending target for climate action focused on mitigation and adaptation measures. And third, also in the humanitarian funding of ours, we will dedicate 80 million euros to reinforce the disaster preparedness of vulnerable populations around the world. So this is why we really welcome this declaration, and we salute all the partners who have already endorsed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We now turn to Madam Cindy McCain, Executive Director of the World Food Programme. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the World Food Programme is pleased to support COP28's declaration on climate, relief, recovery, and peace. Last year, WFP supported 15 million people with solutions to help them manage the threat of hunger posed by the climate crisis. But over the same period, nearly 57 million people experienced acute food insecurity, which was caused primarily by climate shocks. This tells us we need to substantially increase investments in programs that protect the most vulnerable communities from climate-induced hunger. And this is especially true in fragile countries, which receive only a fraction of the climate investments of other nations. The COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief and Recovery and Peace aims to change the imbalance. It's designed to scale up financing for solutions which will enable the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable and fragile areas to better protect themselves. WFP stands ready to support the implementation of this important declaration, and we will work with governments and our many, many partners around the world to ensure its success. First, we will provide financial protection against climate hazards to at least 10 million people by 2025. We will do this by expanding our anticipatory action programs to 40 countries and scaling up climate risk insurance solutions in 25 countries. Second, WFP will work with communities to rehabilitate 3 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. This will enable at least 10 million people in sub-Saharan Africa to become more climate resilient and increase their long-term food security. Third, by 2030, we will support 35 countries to strengthen the climate resilience of their food systems in collaboration with our partners. This requires integrated solutions and action which will manage climate risks throughout food systems and enable 4 million farmers to reduce post-harvest losses. Ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to stem the rising tide of hunger and humanitarian needs around the world, we must step up our investments in climate prediction and protection systems, and we must do it with a clear commitment to target more support to the most vulnerable communities in the most fragile regions of the world. It's critical that in our common struggle to protect our people and our planet against the impacts of climate change, we truly leave no one behind. Thank you.
Join me in thanking this first set of packages, a package of solutions which demonstrates the leadership required to fulfill the promises of this COP. Thank you again for all of the commitments. Please. I have Mr. Mardini, the Director General of ICRC, who is looking at me suspiciously and with great apologies to my dear colleague. Director General Mardini, thank you. I saw eyes coming my way and I thought I couldn't be saying something that smart.
Thank you.
ICRC is at the front lines, as we know, of these crises, as we heard from so many in terms of visiting situations. So, Director General, I salute you.
Thank you so much, Ikonde. I'll be very brief. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, for several years now, the ICRC has been consistently calling on strengthening climate action in conflict settings. So we very much welcome the fact that the UAE presidency decided and managed to shine an official spotlight through this day on this critical issue. So the Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration is an important statement of the political will needed to achieve this goal. We are proud at ICRC and I think within the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement to endorse it wholeheartedly, as well as other humanitarian and civil society organizations that has done likewise. This is a good first step. Now we need giant steps towards concrete, accelerated action in support of those suffering on the front lines. In so many places where we work, we see a staggering gap between global commitment to inclusive development and leaving no one behind and the reality on the ground. This is something that we bear witness to within the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement every single day. A lack of development, an over-reliance on rain-fed and unreliable agriculture, and insufficient access to water, electricity, and critical essential services. Such deficit in development jeopardizes climate adaptation, and to strengthen people's resilience to growing climate risk, sustainable access to energy and water is absolutely key. So too are resilient livelihoods. And in that sense, effectively strengthening climate action in conflict setting requires addressing development gaps in a climate-sensitive manner. And let's be clear, this cannot be carried out by humanitarian actors alone. The only solution and the silver lining is radical collaboration across the board with development and climate actors who have more expertise, who can operate at a larger scale and over longer time frames. International financial institutions, multilateral development banks, they have access to financial resources and mechanisms that enable the longer-term responses that are necessary to adaptation. At ICRC, we are familiar with the realities of operating in unstable settings. We work closely with communities and we witness firsthand the risks they face due to conflict, violence, and due to climate change. We can share what we know, and in all the projects that manage to reinforce the resilience of communities, they all share common features. They are context-specific, they are sensitive to the local realities, they are conflict-sensitive, and aim to tackle the root causes of people vulnerability, and they are provided in partnership with local authorities, with local communities, with service providers, such as municipal water providers and agriculture ministries. But there are still major gaps. We need to do more, and it's about where these responses are implemented. It's about their depth, breadth, and timescale. And doing better is possible. We need to do more, we need to do better, we need to do faster, and it needs to start now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director General Mardini, through you, I think many of us express deep appreciation for the frontline work precisely on the issue of climate, peace and security that the ICRC in the context of the movement is advancing. I will increase my volunteer hours as Red Cross, Red Crescent for my own mission. Please forgive me. Join me again in thanking our distinguished panel. the announcements of contributions to the package of solutions continue as we welcome to the stage further distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. As we welcome further colleagues to announce their package of solutions, and as colleagues will exit the stage.
My brother. Amazing.
Thank you. So we've come to the stage now, the next set of announcements by Ms. Jennifer Morgan, the State Secretary and Climate Envoy for the International Climate Action of Germany, if you would. And I would encourage colleagues to take their seats if they can. Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of UNDP, if you would. Ms. Sarah Charles, Assistant Administrator of USAID. I believe we are also welcoming the Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Programme, excellent. Ms. Joyce Musuya, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Mr. Mikko Ollikainen, Head of Adaptation Fund. You are most welcome, and if I could encourage all to take their seats as we hear the last set of contributions. We're going to have a challenge. I see more coming on. Colleagues, if I could encourage you to take your seats, it's causing a bit of a distraction. We have already Mr. Jagan Chapagan, CEO and Secretary General of IFRC, and Dr. Comfort Arrow, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group. Please take your seats, dear colleagues. Protocol, if you could kindly assist with encouraging all to take their seats, I'd be grateful to you, because so with that, and I trust we will honour those who are still making the commitments. Ms. Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary and Climate Envoy for International Climate Action of Germany. Good to see you, Madam. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and it's great to be part of this day. It's an important time to be bringing peace and stability together. I'm going to try and get my mic. Thank you, Achim. Vielen Dank. I just want to also thank the UAE presidency and its leadership for bringing together climate peace, recovery and relief. I think the declaration sends a very strong signal, and we very much stand with the countries and the communities that are most severely affected by the climate crisis, while at the same time being threatened by fragility or conflict. And I think this is an opportunity to bring these different, if I may say, worlds that are so really connected together. And that's very important because those people are tremendously confronted with humanitarian needs. So I think this broad support base that we're seeing, it really shows the potential and the spirit to increase our support for people at the front line of climate change and instability. And we were glad to be able to substantially advance this important declaration through our Climate for Peace network. Germany supports and commits to the declaration. And I think on the big picture of things, and then I'll go into the specifics here today, I mean, the launch and the decision on the loss and damage fund here on day one was a very big priority for Germany and for the European Union. And our matching grant with the United Arab Emirates of 100 million each has now catalyzed over 600 million euros for the loss and damage fund. We know that's just to get it up and running. And, you know, our humanitarian work that we do, also really having the anticipatory approach for humanitarian help is very important as well. And we will remain committed to that and hopefully should remain second largest donor on that. But I think I wanted to bring some additional pieces which are around the new and innovative and specific approaches here. And I think we need to be very much more gender sensitive and be more inclusive in our approaches. And so just this morning, Germany launched a new Women and Climate Security Funding Initiative together with our partner, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Our seed funding of €3 million provides support for grassroots and for local women's organizations and communities at the forefront of preventing and responding to climate-related conflicts. And we have a couple of projects that are starting in Colombia and in the Pacific, in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu. And we combine, and this is kind of bringing these communities together, the peace building and climate action to increase women's leadership in conflict and crisis contexts. And it also, this funding really fosters women's participation in decision-making processes and women's leadership in peace negotiations and socioeconomic recovery efforts. So very important to have that diversity and that inclusion. Secondly, we're happy to announce another group commitment together with partner countries, members of the Climate for Peace Initiative, present here today, supporting the unique role and work by the Climate Security Mechanism. The CSM has mainstreamed climate and security within the UN and developed more holistic approaches to address the multiple challenges of human security and climate change. We have climate and security advisors in South Sudan, in Iraq, in the Horn of Africa, in Central Africa, in the West Africa and the Sahel. Climate and security advisors have worked in the missions and local stakeholders, providing those specific trainings on climate security and actually, again, bringing strategies and innovative strategies together. So we're triple our financial support for the CSM, providing €3 million a year plus a junior professional officer in 2024. But I just want to end by saying we know that the most important, or along with all of this, we have to phase out fossil fuels, build up renewables, and have emissions in just about 6 years. That is one of the key pieces. And we need to get funding into the Adaptation Fund and to resilience, often the forgotten piece. Thank you.
Thank you, State Secretary Morgan. We now turn to Ms. Rockensteiner, Minister of UNDP, if you would, sir.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to join the previous panels and this panel. And listening to all of you, I reflected that in the work of the United Nations generally, but also particularly in that organization that I lead, the United Nations Development Programme, much of what we have touched on here this morning, and that is reflected in the declaration, is our daily reality. And it begins sometimes on the back of tragedy, of failure to prevent. And that is particularly where the interface between humanitarians and development and also the political organizations very much is part of the solution. But more often than not, in this day and age, we should be focusing on prevention and the ability to actually not end up in a situation where we have so many countries exposed to fragility, to be crisis countries. And again, UNDP works in virtually every fragile and crisis-affected country across the developing world today. It is part of the reality with which we try to both help people recover, find the development pathway out of crisis, recognizing that climate resilience and adaptation are fundamental building blocks of rebuilding livelihoods, but also long-term strategies. The climate security mechanism, Jennifer, that you just referred to, together with UNEP, UNDP and DPPA, our Department of Political Affairs, is another form in which we have tried to bring these different threads together, sometimes at the global level also, because policy making matters, recognition by leaders matters of these integral pieces that we need to deliver. As the largest climate implementing and also often in terms of peace and recovery implementing entity in the UN family, we have a very significant portfolio, and as of this very moment, over $450 million are being invested, particularly in fragile and crisis countries, in order to address climate vulnerability and, more importantly, how to make development more resilient. So, in coming today to this meeting, I want to also recognize the United Arab Emirates. I think it is an important signal to send. It is certainly a reality that many on the ground and on the front lines of climate change have been living for many years already. Thank you very much, and thank you also for the support that Germany just offered to the climate security mechanism. I think it is seeding these initiatives that will help us to move from analysis, recognition, and rhetoric to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Please join. We now turn to Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director, United Nations Environmental Programme. Please, if you would, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I will echo what Akim said, and essentially also very much thank all the supporters to the climate security mechanism, Norway mentioned before, and now Germany and many others. But I also want to salute our friends at the UAE for really putting this for the first time at a COP agenda. We, from the United Nations Environment Programme, we are acutely aware, and we start from the western side of the Sahel, and you go all the way to Afghanistan and across, and you see that where climate is giving people punches, too much water, too little water, insecure around harvest, etc. Yes, there are other aspects, politics, ethnicity, religion, etc., that are driving conflict, but as you peel the layer of this onion, there is always climate. And so the reality is, as we heard from Executive Secretary Gebeyev from IGAD, that these countries are taking hard hits. We from UNEP are privileged to be based in Kenya, and we have gone through 4 years of extreme drought. In the northern part of Kenya, we meaning Kenya, lost 1.5 million heads of cattle. And you might say, well, yeah, okay, that happened. Well, when cattle are lost, then, of course, families go poor. And so before this crisis, there was 1.5 million kids in school feeding. After the crisis, there are 4 million kids in school feeding. Now, is that climate justice? Will that be eligible under the Loss and Damage Fund? These are the kind of conversations that are hard. Similarly, we need to consider the debt distress of many of these countries. They've taken out loans to build roads and infrastructure. The infrastructure is washed away. The loans are not washed away. What does climate justice look like in that regard? And that is what pulls the rug under the structures of the state to enable the state to begin to build so that you can have strength in the state and avoid insecurity. I have, and I know that Joyce Musuya will mention some of this, she is the deputy of OCHA, but visited Pakistan, visited Malawi, etc., and seen the impacts of climate and how this is happening now when we are living at 1.1 degrees increase. But right now, as our emissions gap report shows us, we are, based on the NDCs, heading to a 2.9 degree world in 2100. If we add the conditional NDCs, we're heading to a 2.5 degree world. None of these are acceptable, which is why stepping up on decarbonization is the only way to go. But in the meanwhile, these folks in these countries are suffering and suffering greatly. Yes, we have mechanisms, but they're woefully inadequate, and stepping up and understanding, as we heard the Commissioner speak to, that insecurity, climate disasters often go very much hand in hand. And insecurity is a thing that we should all be deeply concerned about. So we from UNEP, like UNDP, have worked on this for a decade. We do much of the analysis. We work together with those that have the boots on the ground, and we come in with the environmental analysis and support countries. But there's a long way to journey. This declaration is a very important first step, but we have to put now action behind the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now turn to Assistant Secretary General Joyce Musuya, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Itonde. First, I want to thank the UAE as COP President for driving this declaration, and I thank all those who have collaborated on and endorsed the declaration. It is timely and relevant. The humanitarian impacts of climate change are already with us, and they're devastating. In the last 20 years, we have seen a staggering 800% increase in climate-related needs in humanitarian appeals. In many cases, climate change is overtaking other factors as the predominant driver of humanitarian need. The effects are hitting, sadly, the most vulnerable countries and communities, worst and longest, countries that have often contributed the least to climate change. And they're hitting countries often riven by years of conflict, economic strife, and underdevelopment. The declaration says all of the right things about closing the climate finance gap for fragile and conflict-affected countries. But the most important thing now, as articulated by others, is to take concrete steps to put these words into action. The humanitarian system cannot be a solution to climate change, but we are committed to playing our part. We are endorsing the declaration, and we will contribute to the package of solutions in 3 ways. First, we will use the UN Central Emergency Response Fund to channel more support to communities affected by climate-related disasters. Second, OCHA will facilitate mainstream and scale up collective anticipatory action. We will use the OCHA-managed pool funds to pre-arrange finance for collective anticipatory action, including a guiding figure of investing 10% of CEF's annual spending on anticipatory action. Third, we will deepen our coordination with partners on the ground to reach across our humanitarian, development, and climate silos and make sure that communities affected by climate disasters get all the support they need to recover, adapt, and build resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Secretary General. We now turn to the Assistant Administrator, Sarah Charles of USAID. The floor is yours.
I want to echo thanks of others to the United Arab Emirates for using their leadership of the Cop28 presidency to bring us together on this important occasion, and a special thanks for elevating relief, recovery, and peace and climate change for the first time at a global climate conference. This elevation matters today, but even more so after we leave this conference. The United States is honored to join the Cop28 Declaration on Climate, Relief, Recovery, and Peace, on which we work tirelessly with many of you. We've already heard from Joyce so eloquently about the reasons why this declaration matters. So I want to highlight a couple of examples of how the United States is supporting solutions. First, through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, the United States is aiming to support more than 500 million people to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. And we're making sure that the needs and expertise of vulnerable communities who are experiencing instability or conflict are key to that work. Second, the U.S. is investing over $50 million in implementation of early warning systems, essential tools that we know save lives and assets. USAID and the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, are working with the World Meteorological Organization, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and National Meteorological and Hydrological Services in 20 African nations, small island developing states, and least developed countries to establish and advance early warning systems on floods, droughts, cyclones, and heat waves. But even as we strengthen our investment in early warning and adaptation capacity, we must also be working to swiftly deliver response and relief for those communities that are already bearing the brunt of climate insecurity. As the largest humanitarian donor, the United States government provided nearly $15 billion in life-saving humanitarian assistance this year. That includes responding to climate disasters. And we're working to transform humanitarian response and scale up anticipatory approaches to get ahead of climate-related disasters, including by expanding the use of pooled funding that supports early action and anticipatory action. For example, we contribute to the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, or CERF, for rapid response to climate disasters, ensuring funds can quickly reach those in need when disaster strikes. And we also support IFRC's Disaster Response Emergency Fund, or the DREF, with increased support in recent years, another effective mechanism to quickly and directly fund local humanitarian actors and support acting ahead of disasters. In addition, we're supporting the creation of the Secretariat for the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations to scale and adapt specifically locally led humanitarian action in the face of rising climate disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Mr. Mikko Ollikainen, Head of the Adaptation Fund. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to speak at this launch event as part of the launch of the declaration and to convey our endorsement of the declaration. For the Adaptation Fund, building a resilience for the most vulnerable communities is the core principle of our mandate. Over the last 15 years, we've invested over $1 billion for 160 innovative and localized climate adaptation projects in the most vulnerable communities of developing countries around the world. Close to 50% of those are in least developed countries and small island developing states. As outlined by the 6th assessment report of the IPCC and to the Cop28 thematic area of recovery and peace, many of the communities facing the adverse impacts of climate change are located in highly vulnerable countries, particularly those threatened or affected by fragility or conflict, or facing severe humanitarian needs. The IPCC report highlights the urgency of adaptation action to address compounding risks faced by vulnerable populations living in regions susceptible to both climate shocks and enduring conflict. Yet they receive disproportionately low levels of investment despite the potential for high returns in terms of human development and stability. This COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace is fully aligned with the Adaptation Fund mandate to promote resilience and help communities to further access climate finance for adaptation in all eligible countries, including in fragile and conflict-affected environments. Many of the projects we support are implemented in countries with highly vulnerable communities, particularly those threatened or affected by fragility or conflict, or facing severe humanitarian needs. We remain committed to further expand our support to countries which are facing multidimensional vulnerability in their fight against climate change, including building capacity for long-term resilience. Many of the proposed objectives and actions in the declaration are already part of our operational modalities, and we stand ready to further scale up our support under our new medium-term strategy. For example, through our enhanced direct access window and expanded windows on locally led adaptation slated to be operationalized next year, we will enhance local ownership and participation, empowering communities to implement climate adaptation projects tailored to their specific needs. Addressing climate change issues needs to be inclusive. We stand ready to collaborate with partners in this room to address the compounding risks faced by vulnerable populations in countries experiencing both climate shocks and enduring conflicts and fragility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We turn to Mr. Jagan Chapagan, Secretary General of IFRC. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tande, colleagues and friends. Of course, we fully endorse and support the declaration. And here I would like to share maybe one proposal and three solutions. The proposal is that, when you talk about humanitarian development, climate relief, recovery, or peace, the convergence point is the local communities, the people who live in the communities. So my proposal here is that let's put the local leadership and local action at the center. Community leadership and community action at the center. That's how the peace gets built. Now, from the IFRC point of view, three solutions I want to share with you is, number of colleagues talked about our disaster response emergency fund. We have committed to spend at least 25% of that fund on anticipated action to make sure that the relief and recovery can happen as rapidly as possible, because that's extremely important in saving lives and livelihoods. The second, and very important, and I want to build on what my friend Akim already said, would it not have been better if we had invested 30, 40 years ago to minimize or avoid the current fragility and conflict? Now, at the moment, we are focusing on fragility and conflict, but by ignoring that investment in 30, 40 years, we may be contributing to create new fragility and conflict. So it's extremely important that investing in resilience building, in development to ensure that we minimize and avoid the fragility would be extremely important. Here, from the IFRC, we have established what we call the Global Climate Resilience Platform. We aim to invest $1 billion in next five years in climate-affected communities to build that resilience. The resilience communities minimizes the chances of fragility and minimizes the conflict. That's the contribution we want to make. The third one, and which I think we have been talking about a lot during this conference, has been ensuring that there is an early warning for all. That early warning is backed up by financing so that the early action can be taken. And by doing that, you again contribute in building the resilience, and by doing that, reduce the fragility, and by doing that, you contribute in building the peace. These are the proposal and solutions I want to put on the table on behalf of the IFRC. Thank you. Back to you, Attorney.
Thank you, Secretary General. I now turn to Dr. Comfort Arrow, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tonde, and I really want to just endorse what you've just said. Also, given what you've just said about investment, congratulations to the UAE for making this the very first COP where we've got an explicit discussion on peace, recovery, and as you said, resilience as well. So real congratulations, and I see it, quite frankly, as a pivotal moment in the discussion on climate discourse going forward. And I hope that we're able to sustain this Peace Day so that we can have many more Peace Days, and that we're seeing serious investment towards that. Of course, Itunde Crisis Group supports the declaration. This is why we're here. And we have a specific tool that we are already using that will follow on to support the package of solutions that the declaration already enforces. That is an initiative that we are calling eArth. It's an environmental early action risk tracking hub. We're marrying what Crisis Group does best, political analysis, early warning, and bringing the climate science to help inform the decisions that decision makers have to make. We are doing this specifically in the Horn of Africa, which we see as a microcosm of all the key challenges that many people have been talking about today. Why the Horn? Because it is the place where we've seen severe weather events coincide with real destructive conflicts. We're looking specifically at South Sudan and Somalia. You'd have heard already from the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia when he talked about the droughts, the insurgents exploding, colliding in a tsunami of crises already in Somalia. The aim of eArth Itunde is to bridge the gap between climate analysis and crisis prevention, sounding the alarm, reaching affected populations, as you quite rightly highlighted, and making sure that all decision makers get the information faster in a very clear and targeted way. Our aim, Itunde, is first to ensure that we help decision makers understand the linkages between climate and conflict. Secondly, to make sure that money is allocated in the right areas where there's a great climate spillover. And thirdly, to make sure that what we do speaks directly to the realities on the ground. That is our commitment to the declaration, our commitment to everybody that is standing behind the notion of peace, resilience and recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colleagues, mindful of all the commitments that have been given and the pressing needs and ongoing negotiations underway, I'm going to break protocol slightly and invite Mr. David Miliband, President and CEO, International Rescue Committee, to the stage. Ms. Nemo Hassan, Director, NGO Consortium Somalia, to the stage. Please, if you would come forward. And as you're coming forward, I'm going to say the following. In my capacity as President of Interpeace, we firmly endorse the declaration and believe that implementation of the Paris Agreement will only be possible if climate action is conflict sensitive, as my distinguished colleague just indicated. And to this end, we offer as a tangible contribution to the package of solutions a partnership with CGIAR, Focus Climate Security, specifically the Climate Security Programming Dashboard, which will be launched tomorrow. So I thank you for this. We turn to you for closing remarks, and we will equally applaud our distinguished panel at the same time. Please, Mr. Miliband.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a tremendous honour to be here, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely right that Nemo Hassan, on behalf of the Somalia NGO network, will conclude this landmark debate and this landmark session. I'm just going to say a few words about what I think comes out of the declaration. We don't need reminding, and certainly the people that we at the International Rescue Committee serve don't need reminding, that conflict and climate go together. 16 conflict-affected countries, all in the top 25% of climate vulnerability, represent 60% of global humanitarian need. They are living out the tragedy of the climate conflict interface today. What I think has come through this debate is that a declaration is great, but it only achieves something if the words are turned into action. Previous COPs have made other commitments about other subjects, and it's been way too slow to turn the words into action. We have to resolve today that the words of the declaration are turned into action in key areas. Action to make sure that risk mapping includes the communities affected at a granular and local level. Many good new initiatives on risk mapping. Let's talk to the people, let's bring them together. Secondly, absolutely vital that we innovate for climate adaptation in fragile and conflict states. That innovation needs to be anticipatory in its effects, but it also needs to get to grips with the tragedy of livelihoods being laid destitute by the climate crisis. Thirdly, no more fear of using civil society and working in partnership with civil society between the multilateral agencies and local civil society. It's civil society that has the reach where the mainstream system fails. And finally, let's have action to bring together climate finance with humanitarian finance. The separate stovepipes have been separate for far too long. Final word. Humanitarian action is the first step on the road to development. Reduce the suffering, start to make the improvement. Let us resolve that when we meet in a year's time, there are not just more signatories to the declaration, but the number of people suffering humanitarian need is going down, not up. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Please, the floor is yours for a final remark.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As a frontline humanitarian, as a Somali sister, as a friend, let me tell you, we, the Somali people, are coming to terms with the impact of concurrent droughts. 5 failed rainy seasons, now comes El Niño and the horrendous flooding. What I'm about to share is the reality of climate crisis. What stays with me is a day last year at an IDP camp in Kismayo. We heard of Ubah, a 4-year-old daughter of Jawhara. Ubah could not keep food down and was constantly ill. The next morning, she died. Her mother, Jawhara, said she will always remember her daughter as the happy little girl. A couple of days ago, I visited Baidawa and Beledweyne in south-central Somalia, 2 of the worst affected cities by the El Niño rains. The situation was deplorable. Hakima, a mother of 4 children, including 1 disabled, had sought refuge at the displaced people's camp due to conflict. Thrice, she's been displaced. This time, not by drought, but by floods. The urgency could not be clearer: to do better, to act faster, to build resilience together. The launch of the Cop28 Declaration on Climate, Relief, Recovery and Peace is a welcome step forward. Thank you to all those who endorsed it. We celebrate another historic moment at Cop28, the decision to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund with pledges. While we all celebrate these steps forward in decisions, we must take big leaps forward in delivery and turn this into action. I always hear about the issue of trust from a donor perspective, but trust is a two-way street. While change is being made on the ground by communities, local actors, and countries facing impact on climate change, trust needs to be also earned by delivering on commitments. There must be a mutual respect for change to happen. We need to ensure that the funding is accessible by the communities, local actors, so that they can make informed decisions. The funding needs to reach them fast so they can act before disasters. It needs to be flexible because our needs are not static. They change just like everything else in life, just like the climate is changing. The funding needs to be multi-year, long-term, be additional to humanitarian fund to ensure adaptation and development takes place, not at the cost of humanitarian needs. Funding must be grants so that people least contributing to the climate change do not pay for the actions of others. As David said, we need to take risks. Just because we're risk averse due to our own bureaucracies, rules and regulations and red tape does not mean that we need to kill the hopes of dreams of millions of others. The risk of inaction is far greater. We need to reach women like Hakima, who can ensure that her disabled child can have a better future and not fear every time it rains. We cannot have another child of Jauhara be taken away because of our inaction. The ball is in our court to act and play the fair and just game. Time is of the essence. Let us leap forward together. Thank you.
A word of appreciation, please, to our final speakers and to our distinguished panelists who are still here. And herein ends the launch of the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace. Thank you, and thank you to all for those commitments.
Ladies and gentlemen, this means that this session is now over. The next session, Reaching the Last Mile, will begin at 2:30. Thank you.